Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist. We're here today with the usual reminder that this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes. It does not constitute working with a mental health provider. Please seek out one in your area. So we're back today for some TheraBlerding with my favorite co-host and fellow TheraBlerd, Mercedes Samudio, which, I'm just going to go ahead and read her bio, and then we can get straight into what we're going to be TheraBlerding out about. Mercedes Samudio is a licensed clinical social worker, best-selling author, international speaker, and visionary and entrepreneur. She works with parents around the world in developing a healthy parental identity with her revolutionary parental identity development model and incorporating her shame-proof parenting philosophy to help reduce the shame parents experience as they raise healthy children. She's also trained in trauma-informed modalities, which she uses in her work with parents to help them heal from past traumas that can influence the way they parent and interact with themselves and their children. Outside of her professional life supporting parents, Mercedes is married to her best friend and soulmate, and they live in sunny Southern California with their 3 furry children, 2 cats, and a dog. You can reach and learn more about her work at Shame-Proof Parenting, and I'm also going to throw into the fact that our dear Mercedes is also now Dr. Mercedes Samudio. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. Yes, I am Dr. Samudio now. It's so different. It feels so crazy.
Oh yes, gotta make sure I'm putting that in there. Got the spin on the name,
I love it.
Which in its own way kind of gets into what we're going to talk about today. So what probably for some, if you're depending on what you were seeing in the movie theaters and the trailers, you probably saw a particular movie that got announced, and I'm going to admit, looking at the way things have gone lately, it's pretty much just almost disappeared at this point. But we're talking about the particular movie called The American Society of Magical Negroes. As soon as we saw that one, it's like, okay, this is either going to be really, really great, or it's going to be really, really, oh my. And I'll admit that as I started watching more previews for it, I immediately thought of the other movie similar to it that was in the probably early 2000s, which was Undercover Brother. And it's like, oh, this is another variant on that. So let's see what comes up. And that's what we're here to talk about. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, exactly what you were sharing. It was definitely, I definitely felt some type of way watching the trailers for it.
Mm-hmm.
The title was interesting because that is a common trope for African Americans and Black folks to be the magical Negro and to kind of show it that way. And so I was interested to see, was this going to be a parody take? Was this going to be a straight take? It kind of, from the trailer, felt like it was going to be a romantic comedy, which felt kind of awkward. So I'm like, how does that work? Right. And so we went into it kind of like, what are they going to be trying to say here? What message are they going to be trying to bring forth here for sure?
Definitely. And especially with one thing that they sort of gave away in the trailers is how the magic works and what they're supposed to be doing, which also reminded me of another comic book that came out probably about the 2000s called Excellence as well. That kind of also has a similar theme in the aspect of Black people with magical powers making, without spoilers, white people's lives better.
Interesting.
And
as you say that, it is a common piece. That's the whole idea of the trope, right? That the magical Negro is only there to, and it happens throughout the movie, to impart, just that one piece of wisdom that is going to change their life, or as we dive into some of the mechanics, right, to make sure that their discomfort doesn't get so high that it becomes a threat to us. And I think that's something that, from again the trailer, I was interested to see how are they going to be using those mechanics and discussing these things, because these are really sensitive subjects for Black people, right? That we're always aware of white people's comfort level, whatever that looks like. And so I was interested to see how would they use that mechanic? How would they talk about that? What would they do? Right. And I was hoping that it would go down the route of a parody where we could talk about these things and begin a discussion. And I feel like that's what it does, even if it doesn't do it consistently throughout the whole movie. I does begin to start a discussion on what are these tropes, or are these real lived experiences that Black people are dealing with all the time.
And what is some of the purposes and outcomes that we look at, and especially as we get to look at this from the standpoint of therapy as well. I will say that as my partner and I were watching it, and then afterwards he basically said, I think this movie is good, and there's definitely things for people to talk about, but it's probably not going to get the people who actually need to watch the movie coming to see it.
Yeah. And I actually have to agree with you on that. I think there was a lot of backlash just openly when it first started, when the promotion for it first started, because I don't think the marketing for it really portrayed what type of movie it was. I don't think the marketing really knew how to portray the movie, which then led people to be really turned off by the way it was presented and marketed. So I felt the same way as I was watching it, and as I was watching the discussions and the situations that the two characters were in. I was like, oh, these are great moments of discussion to talk about, because you have it here fictionalized, but at the same time, it's really something that happens to folks. So I agree. Well, I think there were definitely people who need to see this movie who may not see it, or it may take time before people get a chance to really understand what this movie was trying to say.
Right. And this may be one of those that's going to become more of a cult classic later on in its life expectancy. But still, it's just the awkwardness comes through in so much. And that even is portrayed well, I think, by its lead character, which is Justice Smith, who was also in Dungeons and Dragons, which I think he played that one far better, as Aaron, who is an artist who is basically not getting the looks that he had hoped with his creations. And he's seen by David Alan Grier, who is playing sort of the elder magician wizard in this story as well.
Yeah, kind of like the Merlin, right? The dumb. Yeah.
Which brings up that it's not just the tropes about the magical Negro, but just the aspect of where and how do we use magic.
Yes. And even them deciding to pick him, right? One of the things that I thought was interesting is when they first start talking and he asked him, how aware are you of white people? And he's like, I'm not aware of it at all. But then as he started to pay attention to, like, how do you move? How do you navigate your space? How do you say something or hold the door open? And Aaron started to begin to understand that, like, his whole existence was really about navigating white people, right? That he didn't think he was doing, but just in the nature of trying to keep himself safe and to manage the discomfort. And so when you talk about using the magic, I thought it was interesting that Roger picked him, right? David Alan Grier's character picked him because he wasn't tapped into his magic. He was constantly unaware of it, in a sense, right? And I say magic, because we'll talk about what this magic looks like as we get into it.
Oh, yes. I mean, there's definitely, I will admit, there was a charm to the particular motifs of the magic, being that it was all literally stuck. Well, it was motifed in stuff of the past versus anything that's looking really modern.
Yeah.
From the pocket watch to the candles that recorded events and so forth. Even to when you're seeing their magical class, it's all using like old oil lamps and such.
Yes, and chalkboards and all of this. And it's fun for me because the common lore is that in magical world, electronics don't work. So it tends to be
Mm-hmm.
very analog, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's that layer there when you bring in the social location of Black people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And our access to technology, our access to what is deemed affluent, right? We haven't always had access to it. And so I thought it was an interesting I would just say like kind of double-sided idea here, where on one end, in most magical lore, there's no technology, right? The magic kind
Mm-hmm.
of, interferes with it, so you can't. But then on the other side, because we're talking about a magical society of Black people,
Mm-hmm.
their insistence on not using all of that technology actually has a lot of ramifications for how comfortable they're making white people feel by staying behind,
Mm-hmm.
staying outdated. The other gentleman who was playing kind of the field hand, and he was talking about what type of field hand he wanted to play. He didn't want to go to plantation. He wanted to be here. And so as you
Mm-hmm.
look at all of the different magical Black people in the society, their insistence on not using technology isn't actually, for me, and this is my opinion, it's not about not using magic because
Mm-hmm.
it interferes solely. That could be part of it. But I also think there's this other piece where we're also not using technology because it makes white people uncomfortable. So we have to be kind of normal and basic and kind of just blend in and
Mm-hmm.
just be an instrument for them, right? And that's how all
Mm-hmm.
of the people in the society are acting, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Even the aspect of the white tear meter. It's like,
Yes.
wow, is that thing just so ancient? It's like, yeah, you could update it. And even Justice makes a comment in during the middle of that, or he starts seeing the society. He's like, you could update the name a bit and such. So
Right. Right. It feels
uh
it feels like such an interesting discussion because in order to say the title of the film, you
mm-hmm.
have to say magical Negroes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that term Negro it's such a charged term, right? Because we're not
Mm-hmm.
saying the derogatory N word, but we're also not saying
Mm-hmm.
Black. We're sitting right in the middle of the discomfort. And I read a really good expose after I watched it that talked about how the director or the writers specifically wanted that because it creates discomfort. Magical
Mm-hmm.
Negro, like you kind of sit in this discomfort as a Black person. What does that mean? What is that trope? Why are we highlighting it?
Mm-hmm.
As a non-Black person, right? Maybe even a white person, you're sitting there saying, how do I say this? Am I allowed to say magical Negro? Is Negro still the
Mm-hmm.
term? What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And even in the title of the film, you've got discomfort already coming up. We haven't even started getting into the actual scenes or
Mm-hmm.
what's going on, if you think about it.
Exactly. And just to put in basis some of those scenes that played out is there is a scene with the drunk white woman who is so inebriated that she asks for help and then forgets exactly what she's doing and almost gets our hero beat up
Yes.
because of
Yes.
her lack of awareness. Or
Yes.
even the aspect of, oh, we're now talking to a cop who is disgruntled and now they're making friends with him to take him out to a club.
Yeah. So they can manage this person's white tears, which is a huge issue in our society, right? This idea of do we manage white discomfort, right? Which white
Mm-hmm.
tears is, the colloquial or slang term for white discomfort or white unease, or when we're talking about white people as a sense of that white supremacy and
Mm-hmm.
colonizing their discomfort, if you will. And so, in managing their discomfort, like you said, that meter, in both of those situations, watching the discomfort rise, right? So, the first, and it's almost, I say this is almost set up like a horror movie, even though it's a
Mm-hmm.
comedy sense, there's this tension where Aaron, Justice Smith, is so into helping and being there and being present and not aware that he just starts helping her. He doesn't pay
Mm-hmm.
attention to his surroundings. He doesn't pay attention to his safety. He doesn't pay attention to the fact that he is out at night by himself in an alley at an ATM
Mm-hmm.
with a non-Black woman, right? Like he doesn't realize that he's so hell-bent on managing this person's comfort that he forgets everything. And that's what I took from it, where this person isn't aware of themselves because they're so aware of other people, right? They're so aware. And in this movie, I think it's heightened that his awareness of other people's discomfort and his lack of awareness of his own discomfort is why I think he got picked to be part of the magical Negro society. It's like, well, you're already doing it. Right? You're already doing it. You just don't have the tools. So let's give you the pocket watch. Let's give you the meter. Let's give you the tools. So since you're already doing it, Aaron, you can do it more effectively. And I think the scene that you mentioned is one of those moments where Roger saw, see, you're already doing it. You literally just started managing it. The part that got really tense for me was when he was holding her purse, right? And then they noticed that he had her purse. He was like, oh, I don't know where my stuff is, right? All of that stuff to me felt so innocuous, where it went from 0 to 100 so fast. And Aaron wasn't aware of himself and his needs and his safety. He easily could have been in a whole other altercation where his race and his gender would have been implicated above all else, right? And so watching step in is kind of what the Society of Magical Negroes is about. Anytime there's white discomfort, we have to step in to manage it. And I really appreciate that message, because I think if you can tap into it, a lot of Black people either feel like they have to do this, or they have to in order to survive. They have to. Right. There's no, I don't want to do this right now. I have to survive this moment. And so I've got to tap into white discomfort. I've got to tap into white tears. I've got to tap into how this other person is feeling to stay safe.
Which, over the course of this, again, I'm not trying to give any spoilers away, also is about a necessity of him being able to recognize it and be able to speak for himself.
Yeah. And I think that's a good trajectory for the movie, right? That, and this is hard to explain, so I'll try, but that if we need a society of magical Negroes, what do we need them for, right? Do we need them consistently and all the time to be there to manage white tears and white discomfort? Or do we need to actually disband this? Is this something that we need to get rid of? And I like to ask that question, because the whole society is just operating. No one has asked that question. No one has asked, do we still need to be doing this? Right? Roger just with Aaron, right? When they go and meet, the head person, she just comes in and starts it off. When he goes to the classroom, take out your books. We're going to learn how to manage, white discomfort. And they just kind of start. No one asked, should we still be doing this? Is this still something? Should the Society of Magical Negroes still be happening? Right. And I think that's trajectory, because I think that's something that he starts wondering as he's going through different pieces. Should I still be managing this person's discomfort?
And I also felt like there was also some stories here talking too about what does it mean for us, because there's that moment where Nicole Byers, who is the president of the organization, comes in and she starts floating. Okay, it was wonderful, but wait a minute, didn't you just use the magic for yourself?
Yeah,
to be floating above everybody?
Yes, look at that. Look at that, though, right? And I think that's something that, again, is more subtle. If you look at the organization itself, there's an organization of magical Negroes. It's not just Roger, right, and Aaron, right? It's this whole group of people that go out. And so I agree. How are we as Black people using our knowledge of managing white people's discomfort to either be above other people, to maybe manipulate and get in the door where we want, to use it in a way, right? I think we often talk about it outside of the context of this movie as proximity to whiteness, right? What does it look like? And so there's this piece to me that when I was looking at the leader, as you shared, right, floating above everyone, or using it the way she was, or even at one point being scared that it could be taken from her, and the lengths that, that person would go to keep it. We start to ask, is that part of, or is that what happens when you start to mitigate and manage someone else's discomfort? Doesn't that give you a level now of power, right? That you might wield in a different way, or maybe not wield in the best way possible, maybe?
Or more deeply, too, in the standpoint of, have you over-identified with the aspect of having that control and that power? As I was talking to a client last week, and I had to say to him, the greatest addiction people have is not to smoking, alcohol, or drugs. It's to control / power.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's something that constantly comes out of managing white discomfort. We notice the power
Mm-hmm.
that comes in their discomfort. And so when we can manage it, it kind of transfers to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll say this. I've had people tell me I am the white person whisperer or white people confide
Mm-hmm.
in me, right? And as I listen to those things, I think, what does that mean? What have you now gained as a result of being a magical Negro, so to speak, as a result of being able to manage white tears so much? What have you learned, right? And are you
Mm-hmm.
using that knowledge in a way that is going to support you in your safety? Or as you shared in the movie, are we using this power similarly as
Mm-hmm.
use their power, right? Are
Mm-hmm.
we using it to stay above? Are we using it to access things? Are we using it to become gatekeepers ourselves, right? How are
Mm-hmm.
we using it?
Mm-hmm. Because there also then becomes that standpoint of, so where's the, for better words, where's the society about our own advancement?
Mm. The Society of the Advancement of Black People, right? The
Mm-hmm.
NAACP, right? Where's that?
Yeah, what
What?
does that organization look like? I
Yeah.
mean, are we saying that it's fledgling? But no, it's like it's coming along. It's got to be here too, especially when, and this becomes relevant again. We're trying not to give too many spoilers. We do find out there is another society out there as well by the end of the movie. Not going to give spoilers on that, and its purpose is just as similar to this society's, about how are somebody else diminishing in some regards themselves to make somebody else feel comfortable
Yes.
as well.
Yes. Yes. Which, if you take both societies as a metaphor, I think that becomes inadvertently what ends up happening when we have all of these isms in the world, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's racism and oppression, when there's sexism, when there's all these things, we have to spend our time managing them
Mm-hmm.
in order to live, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
inadvertently, and I know that this feels like a bit of a stretch, but inadvertently, and I feel this way as a mental health professional for sure, we have currently a society of magical Negroes anyway, right? That
Mm-hmm.
there are people who feel like it's better to manage, right, this and to harness this than it is to maybe get rid of racism, right? Because then
Mm-hmm.
everybody's power goes away. The Society of Magical Negroes, they lose their magic because their magic no longer is needed. We don't have to manage, white guilt or white tears anymore,
Mm-hmm.
fragility, right? Same with the other organization, right? Once those other isms are out of place, then we actually don't need anyone to mitigate that guilt and that issue either. And so
Mm-hmm.
it asked the question, what I said again, right? Where people are just doing it. Not one person in the society said, why are we still managing this? What
Mm-hmm.
is it doing for us to still be managing this? Right. And then you think, well, what it does is it keeps them in power. It keeps them in magic. The more that I'm able to manage white tears, the more I'm able to use whatever magic I have. And think
Which,
about that link.
mm-hmm. Which even Roger says, I'm at this point a wizard in the
Yes.
movie. When
Yeah.
he's questioning that standpoint. And that's also about the point in time, if I remember correctly in the sequence, where he's telling the story about himself and his father.
Mm.
And the idea that, and there we also start seeing the issue of the generational existence gaps
Yeah.
that come up between Roger and Aaron,
Mm-hmm.
in the standpoint of what was the reasons Roger does this work as for the reasons why Aaron would do this work.
Mm-hmm.
And how much we're looking at post-traumatic trauma as well.
Yes. Post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about that. And I think one of the things that the magic, if you will, feels like is that it is the trauma of
Mm-hmm.
having to live in a world where I've got to be aware of what white people feel, or else something could happen to me. And so if you think about, and again, I can't remember, but if you can think about, where does this magic start? It
Mm-hmm.
started with the first Black person who realized I could manage white guilt. And then you start getting magic right from that. What does
Mm-hmm.
that look like? Right. Well,
Mm-hmm.
it looks like, I can have the right wisdom to say the right thing at the right time, or at
Mm-hmm.
least I'm intuitive. So I can feel into how they're feeling and try to manage it. But think about how much energy it takes for a Black person to be so in tune with a white person that they can help them. And as you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, well, where's our society to help us get out of that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Where's the society for, fatigued Negroes? Where's the society
Mm-hmm.
for oppressed Negroes who really need support on, yeah, I'm out here being a magical Negro every day. I am managing white guilt. I'm managing white tears. I'm making sure that they're okay. I'm making sure that I keep my job. I'm making sure that I don't get the police called on me. I'm making sure that you don't think I'm a thug. I'm making sure that you don't think I'm gonna steal something. I'm just always making sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
I get my respect. Who's making sure that I'm not burnt out? Who's making sure that I look okay? Who's making sure that I'm safe? Well, no one is,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm, a magical Negro. My only purpose, if you will, is to make sure that white people stay comfortable so Black people don't die. And I actually think that's how Roger explained it. Like, our only purpose is to make sure that white people stay comfortable so that way Black people don't die. And think about that being your only purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of that is, and how illustrative I think it is of the Black experience in America, that a lot of times it feels like our only goal in life is to make sure white people are okay so that way we don't die.
Which brings that aspect of how caustic is it to our existence.
Yes.
And
Yes.
also when there are the things that are also supposed to be there for us to basically feel like we want to be in this world and live, which then becomes what's the battleground between the love interest for Aaron,
Yes.
and also then his quote unquote client, who thinks that, again, gets into both in a sense of entitlement, but also clearly the fact that, he's not even paying attention to the love interest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. And actually, you made me think about something else along the lines of what I was just sharing about how much energy we expound being the magical Negro, right? So, two things Aaron had to give up. He had to give up his art in order to be a part of the society, and then he had to give up his interest in order to be a part of the society. And think about how subtle it was. It was very, like, his art wasn't doing well. So, all right, well, since you're not doing that and you don't have any interest, your only goal now, then, Aaron, is to manage the white guilt and the white tears of, white people. And then that's how he gets into the society. And so think about that. Think about him as a Black male. His art isn't being taken, into account. His voice isn't being taken into account. He spent most of his life just kind of dodging and trying not to get in the way. And then he gets recruited into a society that now says, for the rest of your life, you really won't be getting in the way. You'll just be managing other people's discomfort, specifically people's discomfort. Right? And look at that this person is here now in this space where I don't have a voice. I don't have interest. I don't have a career, in a sense. And this is something that I'm thinking as is talking about, and I think it came up while I was watching it. In a sense, the Society of Magical Negroes is kind of the end goal of dehumanization and racism, right? That once you've dehumanized people, then you can make them and have them be what you need them to be, which is just someone here to make sure that you're okay. And I think that's the metaphor there that we're talking about. It might get convoluted in a lot of the other stuff because it's such a nuanced thing to say. I think the Society of Magical Negroes is kind of the metaphorical conclusion of, if we continue to allow racism and other oppressive ideologies to continue, then that becomes all we have energy for, is just stand here and manage white guilt and white tears, because that's all we do with all of this oppression, with all of this racism, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. And it also is again, one of the elements that shows up in the movie too, not just for Black people, but also for women as well.
Yes, there you go, right?
Yep. And there's a moment there, and while I was watching that, I leaned over my partner and said, so where's the Magical Society for Women in this? As I'm watching the statement between, I think it was Lydia and their boss, McPherson. And when McPherson is like, oh, we're going to have this done by this man, as opposed to you, even though you've done all the great work on this. And if we don't, because I need you to step back because this is allowing me, the other woman, older woman, to get the advancement in the career, you'll have another chance.
Yeah. Yeah. And so again, that parallel, right? That gender, right? Being a woman in that space, right? Where's their society? And again, we don't want to spoil it, but this idea of, well, what do women do in those spaces? What is a woman's role? Is it to
Mm-hmm.
be supportive? Is it to just say yes? Is it to allow the man, right? The white man who we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
right? The client, Aaron's client, if you will, Jason
Mm-hmm.
is, to allow him to show up. So for Aaron, he has to step back because Jason starts being interested in the young woman, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then she has to step back because Jason is now going to be put up to do the presentation instead. And so you've got both of these both of these kind of oppressed individuals, if you will, who live at intersections where
Mm-hmm.
a man will always be over on top of them as long as we have all of these isms, right? And so for Aaron, he has to give up his identity, his everything, because the white guy was interested in this white lady, but then the white lady has to give up her interest in everything because the white man is interested in doing the presentation, right? And I don't
Mm-hmm.
it was lost on me at all that
Well,
both
I
of
don't think,
them.
if I remember correctly, he wasn't immediately interested in doing the
No, he
presentation.
wasn't,
It's because
but he got put
and
up for it.
he got put up because the other woman who wanted her advancement is trying to then also press a very much misogynistic, racist, full isms boss.
Yes,
And I
yes.
think that's a place where we should take our break that and come back and talk about that more as we move as because that its own subject all its own as we advance and here talking about the American Society of Magical Negroes here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I know it's a mouthful. I'm Barry Clark with Dr. Samudio, and we'll be back shortly, folks.
Follow Voice America at facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Have you become a member yet? Sign up now to become a member of Voice America. It's always free and easy. Plus, you get to take advantage of some great member benefits. Get unlimited access to millions of hours of on-demand content across all of our channels. Keep track of your favorite episodes, shows, and hosts in your own customizable library. Find out what shows you might be interested in based on your favorites. Plus, you get insider access with our newsletter. Membership gives you more. Sign up at voiceamerica.com and click register at the top right.
Build your better business. Achieve that goal. Make good on that resolution. The Voice America Empowerment Channel. It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Dr. Mercedes Samudio, also LCSW, and we're talking TheraBlerding out on the American Magical Society of Negroes. Mouthful. And we're just talking a bit about, and I know I had dropped the aspect about the boss that runs the company that Justice Aaron is basically dealing with his client, and as it turns out, his love interest also works for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got a controversy about facial recognition. And as it turns out, the entire country of quote unquote Ghana can't sign on to this social media platform, which frankly, if that's the case, then every country in Africa, as well as the Caribbean, would be having this problem as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And the problem being,
and it's being that the facial recognition technology, which they are based everything on, does not scan Black people and any part of the diaspora well, which is also a conversation that we know also is an issue that is coming up with who is developing AI and tech as well.
Yep.
From the facial scanning technology to the sensors that you find in the bathroom to turn on the water or to get the paper towel out when you go to use it. Is it registering you're there?
Yes. Yes. And I think this is something that is really a global problem, right? Where it's now we're dealing with AI. And I love that that was the issue for their social media, that their social media facial recognition software didn't recognize Black faces, right? That's the controversy that's going on. But in our world, right outside of this fictionalized universe, that happens a lot, right? There's such a lack of representation in stock photos, right? There's such a lack of representation in films, right? And in movies. And so when we go to look for representation to know, like you just said, does it even recognize if we're here? Well, how can AI do that when we don't even have all of the data for them? Because for years, white faces and white bodies were what the norm was. And I can even be more explicit: cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied white faces and white bodies were what the norm was. So all the pictures, all the, sitcoms, all the commercials were that. And so when you think about this movie tapping into something like that, I think you hit the head right on the nail right on the head, which is, as we move forward in the world, is our world going to be equipped to pay attention to the diaspora, right? Black people, people of color, because, even other groups of people, right? Are we going to be able to acknowledge that they still exist in the world? And I think this movie, by having this be the company's main issue, is kind of asking, and I think that's how I'm feeling it the more I talk about it. I think this movie's asking a lot of questions, right? It's kind of giving, like I said during our break, a buffet of tropes and nuances to really pay attention to without telling us how to feel about it. They're just presenting these people to us, and they're saying, are you noticing how each person is responding to the controversy? Right, when they went out to have drinks, right, and they were talking about the controversy, each character had their own take on it. And in that character's trope, Aaron being the magical Negro, Lizzie being the white girl, Jason being the white man, you could hear those universal kind of ideas about how people respond to finding out that the company you work for doesn't recognize Black faces in their facial recognition program, right? That was a really good scene, listening to them talk about how it affected them and how they were going to move forward with it or what they thought about it.
And that Jason was one of the ones who worked on that particular project, which, as it turns out, is the thing that actually set him off in the discomfort, in the standpoint of, oh, there's a problem you created and didn't even think about.
Yeah.
Even to the standpoint later on where we see them talking about giving this presentation and they've got the VR headsets on. And it's like, and Aaron almost falls down the stairs in the process of it. It's like, how, just another example about being unaware of what's your surroundings. It's like, that's the worst possible room you could be having to set up even for that technology.
Right. But we're in the service of, making sure that white people don't have discomfort, right? So it goes, right? And that's something to pay attention to too. Will we put ourselves in harm's way, right? Sitting there at that table, Aaron just had to sit and listen as he said, well, I didn't do it. He got defensive. Well, it wasn't my fault. How was I supposed to know? And all these things, right? How many times have we as Black people had to sit through that, right? That when we say, well, this is an issue or this is a problem, to then be met with, well, it's not my fault and why this and that defensive, right? And then to have to sit through, well, I don't know what I'm going to do next, right? There's this always, and I think that's part of what this movie is talking to us about, that there's always this kind of film over conversations that Black people have when we're talking with white people, especially, white males, or cishet white males, which is we always have to be monitoring that person's discomfort. And if we're not, what are the consequences? And so for Aaron and Lizzie, the consequences are you get fired if you don't mind. The consequences are no one listens to you, right? The consequences are you get passed up for a presentation because this person would be better off, right? And so we have to constantly monitor that. And I think this movie is asking us, should we always be doing that?
Well, because especially I think it gets into an even deeper question, which comes back to what we were talking about, entitlement. And I know in some of our other conversations, there's have come up is the standpoint of entitlement. And the biggest thing that we expect our children eventually to do as they grow up is learn to work with discomfort of life.
Yes.
And especially, I think this is a hallmark into what we're talking about with the shame and shame-proof parenting is dealing with discomfort about existence, discomfort of the place that you're not always going to get what you want. But you feel entitled to it. And there were so many places there where Jason was sitting with that blinder on that he was supposed to get what he wanted. He was supposed to be supported, that his meritocracy, that he had earned it. No, you fucked up this major release. You do not should be getting this project or speaking to it.
Yeah. And I love that you share that because I think there's a level of entitlement that comes with us always managing white tears. So like you said, Jason always felt like, well, who cares, right? I did it. We're going to fix it, right? There's no sense of accountability. There's no sense of remorse. There's not even the sense of maybe I shouldn't be the one doing it since I had, right, such a big focus. And I feel like that entitlement continues because we're constantly always managing their discomfort. Right. So in discomfort or uncomfortable, we try to fix it and make it better or try to make sure that everyone feels good. So then there's this pattern. Right. And for, I think, this movie to share that throughout the whole time, that's where the discomfort, I think, comes for the audience, that you're witnessing in real time. This actually happens. Right. That even though we put on it, oh, Aaron is part of the American Society of Magical Negroes, that's why he's doing it. If you take that off, you'd be surprised to find how many Black people, especially Black men, have to manage white tears, have to manage white discomfort, because the alternative or the consequence is I could die. Right. And so I think this movie sits us in that discomfort for the whole time. Right. Because you constantly want Aaron to speak up. You constantly are wondering, why is he just allowing this to happen? And I think in those moments, what I encourage people to do, especially because we're TheraBlerding out and we're talking about mental and emotional wellness too, is to pay attention to that discomfort for yourself. Right? Are you angry at Aaron? Why? Right? Are you angry at Jason? Right? Why? Like, when you're feeling this from this movie, and I often share with people, movies are a great place to externalize these feelings. Pay attention to those things, because that to me is why I think this movie is so resonant, that it's not telling you what to think, but it's showing you, it's kind of putting a mirror up to you and saying, this is happening. This is happening.
And I think it's also a bigger one, not just for Black people, but the aspect of how many times and how many people in this world do we do that placation, that appeasement, because of that entitled, not wanting to deal with that entitled response from our families to our employers to things we're seeing going on in the world right now.
Right? Because that entitled response, as we learn in the movie, changes their meter of discomfort. Right? If they're not doing what they want, if they feel like they're being pushed out, if they feel like they're being erased, what's coming up for me now is like January 6th, like that level of entitlement, right? Where I deserve this and I will do it by any means necessary. Well, if we had a society of magical Negroes from January 6th, each of them would have been deployed there, right, for that day to make that level of white discomfort. And so
which then also, then also becomes a question is, if they had been deployed that day, would that have meant that they would have been allowed to have success?
That's a deep one.
And that's why the problem of dealing with just entitlement in general is that it can be more destructive to you than not in feeding the entitlement.
I agree. I agree. And I guess what I'm here, and I'm okay with the uncertainty of this question, because what you just asked kind of just opened up a whole nother door for me. But I also ask is what we don't always know what the other side of that is. So while managing the discomfort creates this storm in us, right? Especially as Black people, we have this decision that we have to make sometimes in a split second. Am I going to manage this person's discomfort or not? Because the alternative could be really dire for me, right? Having the audacity, I would say, to say, you know what, I'm not going to manage this person's discomfort. I'm going to let that go. What does that mean for us? And how do we get to that space? Because I think it's a question of what happens when we allow their white tears meter to get into the red. What happens to us?
Which we do have an example of, which is what happened in Central Park with the bird watcher and the woman who called the police on him.
Yes. Right. And I always
who now has I think it's a Net Geo show with talking about birds.
He sure does.
And,
good.
Yeah. And there was also a lot of anger, which came from people saying, well, he shouldn't deny her, or he should accept this, and it becomes that back and forth of, because I think there's also an aspect, it's a very critical look at respectability politics.
Right. And I think back to that, because I always think, what if he hadn't videoed it, or what if he hadn't filmed it either? Right. Because if you look at the video, this person felt very entitled, right? The whole time, yelling, screaming, I'm going to call the police. I'm going to do this. And he was just kind of filming it, just being really calm. And I think in that moment, right, what if the meter was there on the side of it, what we have seen? And I even get this one question that I think outside of what happened with him, that was more of a positive, right, benefit from that. He defied, I am not going to manage this person's discomfort. Do what you're going to do. And he was able to get to the other side of it, right? I think there are often times when we don't know, right? We didn't have the camera, or the body cam footage is lost. And we never know what ended up happening to these folks. And I think for me, this is why, instead of asking each individual person to be a magical Negro, to be deployed to each individual white client to manage their individual discomfort, I think that is completely the wrong way to do it. I think looking at how do we change systemic issues so that way individual people can't use entitlement as a way, as power, right? I should have this. I'm allowed to have this, right? This is mine. I earned it. If we change systemic spaces that delineate who earns what and who has access to what, then we don't have to deploy magical Negroes to individual white people to manage their tears, because the system now has changed and that entitlement has changed. That's my kumbaya kind of idea, right? That if we change systems that allow access, then we don't have to worry about having a society of magical Negroes. But the fact that we have it is because our systems don't change. And so individual people get to continuously use their entitled spaces the way they want to, because there's nothing to stop. There's no fail-safes in place.
Which in reality, that society should be much larger.
Jeez.
Than what unless they got branch offices across the country, which is understandable, but still, it's like that should have a much larger body count of people performing that service.
Yes, you're not wrong. And I think the metaphor here for me is that's each of us. In a sense, each of us makes those decisions if we're part of the society or not in those moments, right? Are we to take out our meter and pay attention, or are we going to do like, the young man in Central Park did? Are we going to say, no, not today, I'm not going to get into that, let your meter go all the way to red? I'm not doing that today.
Which also becomes a very critical scene where they show in the movie not just Aaron losing his abilities, but somebody else reached that point
not to deal with it today, right? That person pushed out their client, right?
Yeah, which is also in that standpoint of not letting, it comes back to that standpoint of a temper tantruming child. Now, yes, an adult sadly has access to a lot of dangerous things. And there again is an example of, if this was a temper tampering child with that, would be a lot more, and we would be more inclined to want to, oh no, that can't be in their hands. But because it happens with an adult, there comes a point where, oh, we're just going to keep allowing it. No, that is not doing us any good.
Yeah.
It is, again, where is the standpoint of we keep going in circles?
I agree. And I think that, if I can be honest, and I keep saying it, I think that's why I like this movie, because it gave us all of this to chew on. I think what I would love people to do when they watch this movie is to watch it with this idea that it's presenting us with this buffet of tropes, right? What does it look like to be a Black person in the world today who has to manage, constantly be aware of, and be intentional about our interactions with white people? And I think if you have it in that space and you watch what the society is doing and why they exist, I think it'll help you have a different perspective so you don't feel like, oh my God, are they saying that Black people have to do this? No, they're saying Black people already do this, right? And like you said, as the Black people in the society stopped worrying about the meter, you notice that magic, right, changed, right? It started to change a little bit because they followed in. They said, well, what if we didn't? What if we didn't worry about that meter anymore? What would happen? And I think that's a really good ending to a movie that asks so many questions. It finally asked the question, well, what would happen if we did decide not to kill?
What magic and power do they find for themselves? Which is, they can actually enjoy life.
Which we don't get to do.
And there's some other components to the movie which when we don't have time to get deeper into. I also noticed that it continues to have the issues around what are we looking at, same-sex relationships, and let alone relationships interactions. Not even briefly even touching on the idea of interracial relationships too, which there probably wasn't enough time to go through all of that. But in recognizing that there's some hints there and there's some other conversations that could be had too. I just hate to think about the magical society of gay BFFs.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Think about that trope and how that's used all the time, right? And again, I think, if I can say this, I think all of those tropes have dehumanized the people who identify there, right? So if you're a magical hero, people just assume you'll always be there to support them and give them that wise word. If you're a good white lady who always does what she's supposed to do, they just always assume you'll be there and you'll support us and you'll always be there, right? If you're the great best friend, you'll always be cool and you'll always be able to get me out of my rut. Think about that, and think about those tropes are all in service to someone who has all the power over us, and it's usually a white person, right? It's het white male, usually, who kind of ends up being over everybody else. Everybody else just kind of has to fit in, and most of our roles inadvertently become about making sure that they're okay and they're just in their discomfort meter or comfort meter isn't in the red.
Yeah.
Those are 3 other movies, right? He has 2 more movies to do, I think.
Well, that also brings us back to in similar ways to our conversation last time about they cloned Tyrone.
Right, those tropes.
Those tropes as well. So, and which also had David Alan Grier in it too.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like he's been that way, though, since In Living Color. Like, he's always aware of the comedy and the inherent nuance behind his characters. Like, I feel like he was like that even in his Tales from the Hood, or like a lot of his movies. He tends to tell those type of stories or want to play those type of stories.
Which I'm thinking back to I didn't have a chance to fully watch it, but I know there is a 1960s or 1970s movie with David Alan Grier. I think it's what's his name? Not Sidney Poitier, one who did the television version of In the Heat of the Night. They were military officers, and one of them they're following a black unit where someone got killed, and it's the investigation, and we find out that it was the commanding officer of the unit who arranged for the death of this fellow black man because he was not happy with the fact that this person might as well have been a member of that society.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. So coming full circle and playing out the story in the various locations.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So I think we should be wrapping up there. A reminder that encouraging everybody to go and find a chance to watch this and watch it with open eyes.
Yes.
Find those people you would think would never want to watch this in the first place and watch it and have that discussion with them. Especially for our allies and those who are not Black. And the same goes for Hispanic, and right now, if the aspect of you're Chinese or you're Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
These conversations need to happen.
I 100% agree with you. And I think if you can, try to have it at a time where you can have this discussion with people, because I think this movie warrants discussion for sure.
Mm-hmm. So, thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming again, Mercedes. And this has been Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. So stay tuned. We'll be back with more, especially as we head further into Pride Month, because I am not about to start running around with the magic tutu just to make somebody else happy as the gay best friend. Be well, folks.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.